Hi, welcome to BBB. Today I'm going to give you a very quick run through of mastering. Now, if you're not planning to involve a professional mastering engineer, you're probably going to be looking to master your tracks yourself. And whilst it's an enormous subject and I couldn't hope to cover it in any great detail in this project, I can certainly give you a quick run through of some basic mastering practices. So let's have a little look now. Okay, so here I've got Ronnie Jones's Why Don't You Stay, and I'm going to show you three very basic mastering chains that you can use to polish up your own mixes if you don't intend to use a professional mastering engineer. Okay, so I've bounced this track down to one stereo WAV, which is a great way to master. It means you're not tempted to tweak your mix as you go along, but you might like to tweak your mix. That's your call. And I'm actually going to put the mastering plugins on the main outputs rather than the individual track itself. So, at its very most basic, what we're going to do is we're going to pop a little compressor on there, and we're going to use it just to shave a few dB off the top and maybe try and glue the track together a little. So we're going to use a low ratio, we're going to use a moderate attack, we're going to use a moderate release, and we're going to do it all by ear. So let's give the track a little play. Okay, so with that use of gentle compression, I've managed to reduce some of the peaks by about 2.5 dB, which is going to allow me to raise the overall level, which is what we're after from a master. Now I'm going to follow that up with some very basic EQ. Now, whilst I can't personally hear it on my system or through my headphones, I would, as a matter of course, roll off the very lowest of bass. Quite where you put your bass roll off is up to you. Let's have a quick listen. I like to roll off the bass to a point where I actually can't hear it making any difference. Maybe if I had some amazing subwoofers in the studio, I'd be able to hear what I was doing there, but I am guessing. Next thing I would generally do would try and find a little area of muddiness in the mix if there is one. And that's normally around the kind of 200, 300 hertz area, so let's try and find it.
Well, I know a lot of guys have been in love with you, girl, but you didn't let that many into your...
Okay, so we found a little unpleasant spot that we nipped out. I'm now going to try adding a bit of air. So I'm going to use a high shelving filter here and maybe set my frequencies, I don't know, 14 kilohertz, something like that. And then we can just sweep them in.
A secret world, a paradise, or so I've heard from somebody. And I'm just sitting here thinking about the times that we once had. Yes, some of them were crazy, hey, but some of them were...
Now you need to tread a little carefully with a high shelving filter. Sometimes the effects go beyond the system you're listening on. My headphones may not be able to reproduce frequencies that high, but another system might, so don't overdo it. Now I'm going to try and bring the vocal out a little by finding a frequency that really exaggerates the vocal.
Why don't you stay for a little while? Why don't you stay? Come on and make me smile. Why don't you stay? We could just talk all night.
And I might exaggerate the bass end of the song a little, right low down. We're using a low shelving filter here. Just give it a couple of dB.
Why don't you stay? When I heard that you got got married to?
Right, well, I'm going to flick the EQ on and off so you can hear the difference. Firstly off.
So why don't you stay for a little while? Why don't you stay? Come on and make me smile. Why don't you stay? We could just...
Now, it's subtle, and that's what we're dealing in. We're dealing in subtleties here. Now, occasionally you might find that you have a little frequency somewhere that you can pluck out. I can't really hear any in the song, but we'll try and make ourselves a problem so I can show you how to solve it.
Just talk all night. Why don't you stay? When I heard that you got married to that old friend of mine, and it didn't take too long for you to stay.
Okay, so there is a little frequency around there. Now I'm going to nip that out. I'm going to tread careful again. I don't want to ruin the song.
Stepped out of the line to the grapevine. I heard you doing fine, and it's over.
Okay, I think the EQ is good for that song. I'm going to follow that up with the obligatory limiter. Let's do that now. This is RL1 from Waves. Occasionally they're on special offer, so check the Waves website. I would heartily recommend it, unsubtle though it is. I'm just turning off the dithering section here, which we'll get to in a moment. As a matter of course, I always put the output ceiling at minus 0.3, just so the signal goes nowhere near the 0 point. Now, this little link button allows me to adjust the overall volume of the track as the threshold lowers and the volume is actually pushed up by the limiter. That way I'm not fooled into thinking it's better by being louder. I'll show you what I mean.
Thinking about the times that we once had. Yes, some of them were crazy, hey, but some of them were bad. And if they ask me...
Now, as I brought the threshold down, the track was being limited more and more, but it was also getting louder and louder. And sometimes it's easy to mistake louder for better. However, I've used this link function in the middle. It'll bring the output ceiling down with it. And that way the signal won't actually get louder, even though the limiting is taking place.
I'd say I was glad to have known you. So why don't you stay for a little while? Why don't you stay? Come on and make me smile. Why don't you stay? We could just talk all night. Why don't you stay? When I heard that you got married to that old friend of mine, and it didn't take too long for you stepped out of the line to the grapevine. I heard you doing fine, and it's over.
Okay, so now I've found an amount of limiting that I feel isn't ruining the song. I can return our output ceiling to the top. Right, I think that track has had the very minimum of home mastering. I can now hit the bounce button, hit bounce on our main outputs, name our master, I want it to be a WAV, I want it to be 16-bit, 44.1, interleaved stereo, and as this is recording at 24-bit, it needs dithering down. I'm going to add it to my iTunes library, and I'm going to perform the bounce offline. Okay, so let's have a quick look in our media bin. Here is our master. Let's drag it onto our range page. Now, as you can see, it is considerably louder to look at than our original. You can see the top one has all these peaks at varying different volumes, and as a consequence of our compression and our limiting, we've managed to raise the overall level and smash lots of the peaks against the ceiling. Now, it's a pretty crass way to master, but for home mastering it's more than adequate. Okay, let's get rid of that one. We're going to leave the same chain, although we're going to reset our limiter. But this time we're going to insert a couple more flavours along the way. Now, the first thing I would suggest would be an interesting addition to your mastering chain, would be some sort of tape emulation. And in this case, I have a Slate Digital virtual tape machine. Now, you might not have something like this, but it was probably one of my first investments as far as expensive third-party software goes. I'm going to remove any artificial wow and flutter and hiss, however authentic it might sound. And I'm going to go to the preferred settings. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the amount of tape effect on our master, just enough to add a little bit of density, distortion, and a little bit of analog comfort.
Some of them were crazy, hey, but some of them were bad. And if they asked me, I'd say I was glad to have known you.
Now, I like the sound of that tape, but you have to tread a little bit carefully. Now, I'm actually going to swap the position of the tape and the compressor around, because having listened back to it, I think we're over compressing a little.
We once had. Yeah, some of them were crazy, hey, but some of them were bad. And if they asked me, I'd say I was glad to have known you.
So now we're starting our chain with a virtual tape. We're compressing a little. Now, I've got a couple of other little gadgets that I like to use, and I'm sure you'll have your own things that you learn to love. The first is my Sonox inflator, which I think is some sort of multi-band distortion, EQ and compression plugin. There's a lot going on below the surface here, but I find a little bit of the inflator goes a long way on a mix.
Fan and it's over. That's why I asked you here today to see if you could see what I can see. But maybe it was always meant that it would end up you and me. Guess what I'm saying is if you want me, then I'm ready to go, yeah.
Now, I find the inflator adds a bit more presence, a bit more life, and acts as another sort of glue in the mix. Now, following our inflator, normally I have our EQ with our high shelving filter adding air, but I'm going to turn that off now because I've got a rather nice Waves API EQ that I know does a nice job of EQing the top end.
Come on and make me smile. Why don't you stay? We could just talk all night. Why don't you stay? When I heard that you got married to that old friend of mine, and it didn't take too long before he stepped out of the line.
Okay, that sounds great. Now, another little gadget that I'll often use, and I'm going to place this directly before the limiter, is a mid-sides piece of software called Center from Waves. There's lots of variations on this, but it will basically take all the stereo information that sits at the far ends of the stereo spectrum and raise it in level. Helps increase the stereo width beyond where you could with panning. So let's add a little bit of this to the mix.
Come on and make me smile. Why don't you stay? We could just talk all night. Why don't you stay? When I heard that you got married to that old friend of mine, and it didn't take too long before he stepped out of the line. Through the grapevine I heard you doing fine.
Now I'm going to revisit my limiter on the end, and we're going to see how much we can smash this track.
So why don't you stay for a little while? Why don't you stay? Come on and make me smile. Why don't you stay? We could just talk all night. Why don't you stay? When I heard that you got married to that old friend of mine, and it didn't take too long before he stepped out of the line. grapevine, I heard you doing fine, and it's over.
Now, actually, I find the L1 limiter has a bit of a too fast an attack, and that's not something you can change. So actually, this isn't a great limiter for this track. I find if you listen to the snare drum, you can really hear it flatten the beginning of the snare drum and kind of close the mix in. So here's with the limiter on.
When I heard that you got married to that old friend of mine,
And here's it bypassed.
when I heard that you got married to that old friend of mine, and it didn't take too long for he stepped out of the line. To the grapevine, I heard you doing fine.
However, that'll do for demonstration purposes. So let's bounce this as our new master. Let's bounce that down. Here we go. Why don't you stay master 2, wave 16-bit 44 interleaved. Now, I would suggest you always bounce your masters in real time so you can sit there and listen on headphones in case there's a glitch. But we're going to, for speed, bounce them offline. Okay, and let's drag our master 2 onto our range page. As you can see, this one is also significantly louder than our original. Let's see how it compares to the first one we made. Okay, so here's our original. Here's our first master. Now you can see there is a certain density to this middle section that increases on the last one. So we've managed to get it even louder. I'm not saying it sounds better. So let's get rid of those for a moment and let me show you a third way of mastering up a track. And that would be simply to add a limiter to the master bus, set your output ceiling to avoid any overloads, and hit bounce. We've done nothing. That's completely legitimate. It's not going to be very loud. You're not going to have changed it much from your original master, but that might be all you need to do. Certainly if you're going to send it to a professional mastering engineer, that's what you need to send them. So I'm not going to bother bouncing this one down. But as you can see, there are many ways to create a master, and you don't really need all those esoteric plugins to achieve a reasonably good result. Today I've been mixing on headphones, but I would normally flick between my studio monitors, my mono speaker in the centre, my earbud headphones, and these headphones that are here. Between the 3 or 4 systems, you can generally get a good idea if you're making an improvement. So tread carefully and check your masters in lots of different systems afterwards. I hope I've given you a little bit of an insight into how you can master things at home, and I'll see you in the next video.